Great, good to go.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this special meeting, public meeting of the Litchfield Planning Board of May 16, 2024. This workshop, would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, I guess I'll start with roll call of members. Michael Proto, Chair.
Jared O'Connell, Vice Chair.
Travis Tucker.
Johnny Robitaille, member.
Okay, good evening. With us this evening is our Town Administrator, Kim Kleiner, our Town Road Agent, Kevin Brown, and we have Luke Herron, our Town Engineer. Welcome. So tonight, well, before I even begin doing that, is there any public input to start off this evening before we get started? Any public input? Yes. I guess introduce yourselves to the board and stay here.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Jim Petropoulos. I'm a professional engineer and president of Hayner Swanson Inc. And tonight I'm sitting here on behalf of Continental Paving Inc. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in this workshop session. I understand the purpose of this meeting is to solicit comments and input on the draft stormwater management rules and regulations. And if you would give me a few minutes, I'm going to share with you a couple thoughts. I've had the good fortune of being a civil engineer for 40 years. I've been designing sites and roads and drainage for that time, both big projects and small. As I understand MS4 program, it's based on population and its proximity to Boston. And Litchfield is within that region and it's fallen into that category such that the EPA has deemed it worthy of paying attention to stormwater practices. And it looks, Mr. Chairman, looking at the map, about 60% roughly of the town is mapped within the MS4 area. I find it interesting, it's largely in the center part of the site, center part of town, mostly residentially developed, as well as a bit up in the very northern end. I further understand that Litchfield hired a consultant to help them create a program, being an MS4 community, a living document that the town and applicants and townspeople will need to live with. As currently worded, applicants that disturb 15,000 square feet or more land will need to comply with these regulations. That the planning board will be the agent and the overseer of the regulations. It's also my understanding, and I think Morgan will speak to it in a bit better detail than myself, that this is the town of Litchfield has the ability to adopt their own regulations. And a little bit of research I've done, that there are communities in New Hampshire that have done that and done it successfully. I'm going to break down my category, my presentation really to two categories: some micro comments and some macro comments on the overall document in general. The micro comments, I will go through quite quickly. I will cite a section and I'll just cite a comment. And I think what I'll do to help the note takers is, Joan, if it's okay with you, I'll send you my meeting notes in a later email if you want to pass those along to the record keeper.
Sure.
Section 2.3.6 under definitions for clearing. I think it's a very poorly worded definition for clearing. If you look at the definition for disturbed area, I think it's more appropriate for documents such as this. Section 3.2.6 under pollutants, they have heat in there. I understand heat potentially off of large paved surfaces, a higher temperature runoff can affect water bodies, but I'm not so sure if he should be classified as a pollutant. I see rock and sand in there, I kind of question those, I thought maybe dust was a better word, because definitely is a pollutant. Under 2.3.4.2, under the water course definition, I've removed the words underground stream. All groundwater has movement. So I think it's underground stream is a term that need not be in there. Section 3.0, the 15,000 square feet to 1 acre. 3.3.1 and 3.5.2 really speak to the application criteria. I think they're confusing and it is way too complicated for small projects. It is, there's descriptions in there for drawings and submittal material. I think the regs need to be a little bit clearer there with regard to what needs to be applied. 3.4.1J, studying 5 storm events, the 2 to the 100-year storm event for a building addition, I think it's just too much, my personal opinion. 3.6 to 3.8, the planning board will be involved in approvals, bonds, technical review, and deed restrictions for these small projects. I think it will put an enormous burden on the planning board. Give you an example of something that could take 15,000 square feet. It's not much, and it's in total, it's not contiguous. A building addition, a pool area, clearing for a backyard, a new home on an existing lot, driveway construction. A homeowner in town that has a project such as that will need to comply to this process, okay, if they exceed 15,000 square feet. 3.8.4 puts the planning board and selectmen on inspections. Again, I think the third one of the most important boards for inspections for those smaller projects. On 3.12, projects greater than 1 acre. 3.11.3.K has testing dates from November, from April to November. It's really a Massachusetts regulation. It almost feels like the document was cut and paste from another town, and I would suggest year-round testing. 3.11.3 M7, calculations for TSS and nitrogen and phosphorus removal. How are they determined? What is the method for determining TSS? They say that they want 80% TSS removal or 50%, but they don't tell you what the method is or how to determine it. 3.11.6. Is the stormwater permit separate from a site plan approval? In other words, when an application comes in, Rick's recent jolt, the electrical company across from Mel's that just came in, Mr. Chairman, would the site plan approval be the umbrella over the stormwater permit, or would we need to ask for a separate and distinct stormwater permit? And if so, does that require a separate and distinct application? 3.11.8, it speaks to appeals, but the process is quite confusing. 3.11.11, waiver process. What is the criteria for granting a waiver? Definition there. 3.12.4b, consideration shall be given to using LIDs, low impact development, okay? I think they're fine LIDs for small storms, but they don't work in big storms. In some of the storms we get, to do a small rain garden on a big project, they just can't accept the flow, they just don't take it. So I worry a little bit about the onus of requiring developers and engineers to use LIDs. I prefer consideration shall be given. In lieu, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was one of your comments. I'll be quick. 3.12.4, matching pre-development volume. Typically, when we do a stormwater study, we compare pre-development peak rates to post rates of runoff. To offset volume is extremely difficult to do. What is the volume kind of getting into the ground beforehand? What is it afterwards? It's very difficult to accomplish, and especially in a rock site, it's next to impossible to meet that regulation. 3.12.4H, my note says stormwater ponds would be prohibited. There's a lengthy, detailed section in there about treatment practices, but stormwater ponds are an important element to use in projects. And I would hate to be able to not use those. 3.1.2.4J, the Litchfield Planning Board determines the integrity of the receiving water body. No offense to the board members, but I'm not sure they're qualified to do it. Who makes that determination? 3.13.3, landowners shall provide annual reporting and certify performance. Very, very difficult on a small project for a landowner to meet these regulations. 3.14, 3.15 speak to certifications. They want the planning board to certify to certain elements. They want the applicant. The word certify in my parlance, my field, engineering, is a dirty word. We can certify that today is Thursday. That's a statement of fact. But stormwater design is an art form based on assumptions. You assume a ground condition, you assume a rainfall event, you assume so many things, and you put those best assumptions together to create a model and to create a program. And to be able to certify a statement of fact based on a science on assumption, it's really hard to do. I'll give you an example of what we do post-construction. We do something along these lines. So during construction, HSI or any company has performed periodic site visits, attended construction meeting calls, and was in constant contact with the development of the contractor. Based on this level of involvement in the as-built survey of the site, it's our professional opinion that the project, including the drainage design, has been constructed in substantial conformance to the approved plan. That's a type of statement, a professional statement we make post-construction saying that, yeah, that system, to the best of our knowledge, has been properly designed. One last micro comment, and do thank you for the time. The map, the plan, kind of a high altitude graphic, and I worry about a townsperson applying for a building permit and somebody having to make a determination, are you in or out? And really struggling with that. And there's no real provision about who the arbiter is about that. I'm wondering if possibly if you pursue this, if maybe these lines could be brought into the NRP CGIS system, which is a wonderful system in the town, so that somebody could call and look at their lot and see if they're in or not. So I'll just bring that up. My macro comments, again, I'll be very brief. I believe the document is too onerous and overtaxing for the people of Litchfield. I would suggest the following to consider. That the rules and regulations be written with more attention paid to the type of town that Litchfield is, rather than taking a copy right out of the EPA playbook. I would recommend considering exempting projects that disturb less than 1 acre. You can do that. There are other towns in the state of New Hampshire, that are MS4 communities, that exempt projects less than 1 acre. And the reason for that is that to meet these guidelines for a small project, they would have to do a survey, hire an engineer, do a soil study, possible wetland mapping, do a drainage report, prepare plans, submit permits and fees. That could be in excess of $20,000 for clearing a backyard or a pool project. That's not to say small projects can't be a problem. I would encourage you to have a paragraph in there exempting less than 1 acre, but as long as that project uses BMPs, to the satisfaction maybe the building inspector or somebody, so that they're not running rampant and there isn't a lot of mud being tracked out into public roads. I'll conclude by saying I've always enjoyed working in Litchfield. The regulations are straightforward and really easy to interpret. The stormwater rules and regulations really don't feel like Litchfield. They're more stringent and severe than I think they need to be. So, I thank you for the opportunity. I'd be glad to answer any questions from anybody here. And if not, I think Morgan would like to say a few words.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. My name is Morgan Hollis. I'm an attorney with Gottesman and Hollis in Nashua, and I have been doing legal work in regulatory areas for over 40 years, and lately more and more of the environmental regulation aspects, including stormwater management, reading regulations, interpreting regulations for clients. And I'm here representing Continental Paving and also Richard Charbonneau. He asked me if I would look at the regulations, which I've done, and then I conferred with Jim, and I would echo all of Jim's comments, so I'm going to cut out some of what I had to say. But I think that it might be relevant to spend a few minutes on some of the regulations which highlight why Jim's conclusion that, in my words, taking a sledgehammer to a fly in a situation of the town of Litchfield, particularly as Jim has recommended, anything under an acre. We all know having 15,000 to an acre in certain municipal areas would encompass multiple lots if your lot size is 10,000 square feet, for example. But here in Litchfield, 15,000 square feet is going to be your foundation hole, plantings, driveway, walkway, front yard. That's all going to be over 15,000 square feet. That means anybody who's doing anything in this town is going to be regulated by these regulations. And it's not cumulative, which is very interesting. It's not contiguous, it's cumulative. So if you do a garden in the backyard and then you're redoing your lawn, that is a cumulative total of 15,000 square feet. And they're going to have to come in with a plan, and they're going to have to follow these details, and they're going to have to hire an engineer to do a survey of their entire property. You know, if you're disturbing areas, we all think of disturbing as digging, moving stuff around. But the definition of disturbing is if you remove your lawn, if you strip your lawn, that's disturbing. If you plant a garden, that's disturbing. You know, the reality is a lot of these activities don't really generate a stormwater analysis, and they don't generate a necessity of a stormwater analysis. And if they do, it's not part of the site plan application. So you're now developing a whole set of rules for people who just want to work on their property. So I echo Jim's comments. A particular concern, and I'll just address some of these on the 15,000 to an acre category, which highlights, in my opinion, why you don't want to regulate that size of an area. The listed exemption under 3.1.2, by the way, is quite minimal. It does not include an exception for maintenance of repairs to water lines, sewer septic lines, septic tanks, leach fields, underground utilities, and all of which, as I said, on a given property, depending on the distance of where you're going and how much area you're disturbing, is going to put you over that 15,000 square foot mark if you're not careful. Why not consider an exemption for not just existing landscaping, but any new landscaping, gardens or lawn areas associated with a single-family dwelling? Section 3.2 through 3.7 sets forth the requirements of the disturbed areas of 15,000 square feet to an acre. Section 3.2.1 requires a site drawing, which includes, among other things, a listing and a showing on the site drawing of all easements to be located. So you all know, if you've ever done a survey, and Jim can attest to, you do some deed research to find out what's there, then you might realize there's an easement on record, but now you have to delve into the easement as to what it is. Again, just bear in mind, this is all for that lot size, that disturbance area, 15,000 square feet to an acre. And this is for, I try to encourage people to think, what is the purpose of the regulation? Well, the purpose is to keep pollution out of storm drains, which ultimately drain to a water course or a water body. So if you're not draining into an existing catch basin in this town, you're draining into a swale, a ditch, a catch basin, you're infiltrating. You're not putting it in. So that should really be the first criteria. Hey, if you're not draining into one of these existing storm systems in town, why can't you be exempt? No matter what your size is. Your drainage is not going that way. If you're infiltrating, it's not going into a storm containment system. But that, bearing in mind what this regulation says, that's the site drawing. It also says all critical areas have to be shown, and the definition of critical areas is defined as disturbed areas exceeding 2,000 square feet in highly erodible soils, or disturbed areas containing slope lengths exceeding 25 feet, or disturbed areas of any size within 50 feet of poorly drained soils. That suggests and mandates that you need to hire a soil scientist to go out and define what is in your soils in your area that you're proposing to disturb. Again, looking to the nth degree, when you're doing a brand new development and you're putting in a subdivision or you're putting in a large commercial complex, all of that is important to know. What kind of soil conditions, what's the topography, what's the steepness. But do you really want to regulate it more than what you're regulating today for anything 1 acre and under? And by the way, the federal regulations allow you not to regulate under an acre. So this is your choice. And I'm highlighting why I think it's almost imperative that you do that. Because if someone came to me and said, okay, do I have to do this? I'm going to call Jim, he's going to say yes, and I'm going to say, just jump, because that's all you can do. The site drawing is supposed to show existing vegetation, which is not defined in the regulations. So I'm going to presume vegetation would require a reflection on this plan of all grasses, shrubs, trees, plantings for gardens, etc. Topographic contours are listed, and you get down later on as to 2-foot contours. These are some of the overkill, which again, in my book, require a very close look. If you're not going to do a broad brush, let's get rid of the 50,000 to acre requirement. But if you are, I think you need to take some time and say, what of these can we cut out? What of these do we not need to look at unless they're draining directly into a brook or it goes into the river. 3.3.1 under the design standards has a requirement that in planning for the stormwater management and erosion control, whenever practical, and it's always practical, frankly, natural vegetation shall be retained, protected, or supplemented. There isn't a definition of natural vegetation that would be easily understood, but you and I know that some of this natural vegetation is not good stuff, and a lot of people want to take it out. I was recently in a community, they wanted to put a shed, and it was going to be in their 100-foot buffer setback. I was replacing an old shed, and it was covered with this Chinese stuff that hangs. I'm not a plant guy, but I can tell you plant people were talking about it. And they were like, you can do the shed, but under our new regulations, you may not touch that. And by the way, you've got to have a plan that shows exactly where it is on your property first. And again, I just say be aware of these before you adopt them, please. Under the subsection G of 3.3.1, the requirement is that measures shall be taken to control the post-development peak runoff rate so that it does not exceed pre-development for the 2-year, 24-hour storm event. That's a very low threshold, as Jim would testify to, and we're not, I don't know, it just seems to me, remember what you're regulating. 3.4.2 has requirements of construction drawings under subsection A5 of topographic contours of 2-foot intervals. Additionally, under A7, the existing proposed conditions within the project area and within 400 feet of project boundary surface areas, wetlands, and drainage pattern. Again, raise the concern that 400 feet is quite a great distance coming from a wetland. You're essentially establishing this buffer of 400 feet. Let's see, 3.4.2, subsection A11, easements. areas of soil disturbance and areas of cut fill, areas of poorly drained soils, including any portion which might be disturbed or filled, must be shown. Implies that all areas essentially have to be shown, which would require that all soil in the entire property has to be examined to determine what are the soil conditions, how are you touching it, where are you touching it, and show it on a plan, and also shown on construction drawings. And as we know, construction drawings and plans are two different things, so you're asking two separate consultants that you have to pay for to come together and put this together. We move on to section 3.7, which to me is really going to be the burdensome part for homeowners, individual property owners, and the town. Maintenance and inspection requires a narrative description of ongoing maintenance requirements for water quality measures, and it requires it should be recorded on the deed of the property. And I take that that's really a poor definition from a legal perspective on the deed, because I don't think want you to have a new deed. Morgan Hollis gives to the town of Litchfield, and within that deed says, oh, here are the measures that have to be undertaken whenever a property owner owns this property. I think it means more like what you're used to seeing, covenants and restrictions. That having been said, it probably should be cleared up, so it's not on the deed, it's just on the record. It says it's supposed to be in a typical site plan management development agreement. And I know this town doesn't have typical site plan management development agreements. Many big municipalities do, larger municipalities, even the town of Hudson does. You have development agreements, but not master development. You have a development agreement for site plan approvals, dealing with that site plan issue. But a master development agreement is significantly greater. Again, it's supposed to be recording it on the deed. It then goes on to describe compliance with RSA 478:4A, which references what a register of deeds is supposed to do and not do, and how documents have to be suitable for the register, who shall provide document standards. I frankly don't think any of this needs to be in the regulations. It's a state statute. You don't want to be trying to tell a register of deeds what they're supposed to do. It is what the registry does, and if you said, well, the ordinance, if I walked in and said, well, the ordinance says I have to do this, they're going to say, I don't care what you think it says. I'm telling you what the registry and the state law says. So that could be called out without too much problem. There's some technical description on 3.7.2 about what the purpose of the regulation is, and refers to RSA 676, which is strictly an enforcement. So this statute on enforcement of site plans is being tied to enforcement under this document. I think it could be worded better to make it clear that it's just under the umbrella of the enforcement provisions. And then it spells out what the options are, which are penalties, so on and so forth. And I would urge you to take a close look about what the enforcement is, because you are going to be dealing with enforcement of these issues, because not everybody's going to be complying with them. 3.8, we're now out of the small ones, and we're into the moving towards the larger sections. And 3.8 sets forth that for a cumulative disturbance of 1 acre of land that EPA considers construction activity, a federal permit will be required. I think the proper regulation is that for such disturbance, state and federal permits may be required, because it may not be required. And you're telling them, under this ordinance, you must comply with this ordinance, and you must get a federal permit. So somebody has to trundle off to the feds to say, do I have to have a permit? And the answer is, you don't have to have a permit for the size you're doing. So again, just urge a close look at that. Section 3.9.3 sets forth what stormwater management plan shall include, and includes matters which are in excess of what needs to be done, in my opinion. But since it's involving an area of disturbance of over an acre, I leave comments to engineers. I just remind everybody who's not in this business, if you're on the planning board, there are regulations at DES. And if you disturb a certain area, you have to get your alteration and terrain permit. That seems to work pretty well, and I'm not sure why you're trying to do something that's greater regulatory, more regulations, more inspections, more enforcement than what the state does. I think there's a room to give the municipality the right to inspect, the right to enforce if it wants to. And a lot of times municipalities don't have that, and that's the concern. Concern of the feds starting this program was, hey, we've got the states working, but most of this pollution is taking place in municipalities. So what are you gonna do about it, folks? What are you gonna regulate? And if you don't have, very good stormwater management regulations, you don't have any enforcement authority. So I understand the purpose of some of these regulations, but just be aware the cost and expense of enforcement and inspection. Let's see, there's a section 3.9.11 contains an interesting provision that the planning board reserves the right to authorize or waive some or all regulation requirements and/or projects at its discretion. If this is going to be included in the regulation, there should be some standard so every applicant doesn't come in and ask you folks to waive some or all of the regulation requirements. Because that's going to be my first step if I'm representing it. Hey, it says you can get a waiver. Let's go in. Let's describe our problem, let's get a waiver. You're just gonna be listening to waiver after waiver, and you're gonna have to decide, how do you know what to waive? Why shouldn't we just waive everybody? Well, maybe you should, I don't know. I think any disturbance under an acre should be waivable, but of course I think any disturbance under an acre shouldn't be regulated. I don't know whether the right thing to waive the regulation is authorized under the federal regulations, which are mandating the adoption of some form of regulation, and it should be reviewed by town council. The second sentence in the section allows the planning board to reserve the right to address items and/or projects not specifically addressed by regulations on a case-by-case basis. Again, from a legal perspective, if my client came in and you said, well, it's not in our regs, but we'd like you to do this, of course, I'd let the client decide the reasonableness of it, but I don't think you can have a regulation that gives planning board carte blanche right to just decide on their own what they want to regulate. So I would urge you to take a good look at that provision in 3.9.11. Because this implies, notwithstanding the regulation, if the planning board sees fit, it also reserves the right to further address concerns about stormwater. You should adopt whatever regulation you're going to adopt, but not reserve the right to have further regulation on your own. It leaves the applicant subject to some abuse of discretion, and leaves the planning board wondering how do we determine what is a good regulation and what's not. Section 3.10 sets forth the requirements for areas being disturbed that are 1 acre or greater, and contains many of the regulations set forth in 3.2 and 3.7, just in greater detail and somewhat more onerous, but understandably perhaps, because that is a development now. I'll just highlight a couple of provisions under 310 that I'd ask you to look at. It covers stormwater management of new development, and under subsection A, it lists surface waters and wetlands shall be protected by minimum buffer setback distances, and stormwater and erosion and sediment control BMPs should be located outside of the buffer zones unless otherwise approved by the planning board. I frankly think that's in your regulations, the way you regulate now. You've established buffers and you've required BMPs if you're going to have any water coming off the site going into another body of water, whether it's a wetland, a drainage ditch, or whatever. This would seem to supersede the current town zoning regulations about buffers, because there are some suggestions, as I said, in the earlier part of the regulations, which are carried forward here under 3.7, that say 400 feet is the measurable distance. So I don't want you to be passing a regulation that somehow expands your very well thought out buffer zones, buffers to wetlands, buffers to water bodies. You have distance established, well protected, the Conservation Commission does a good job, now you're introducing a whole other set, an overlay regulation, which I'm not sure you need. I think the town should make a decision, as many other towns have done, that activities within buffer zones are best left to planning boards. For example, oftentimes BMP would require that the only place to locate a stormwater management facility is at a very lowest point on the site, which happens to be within the buffer setback. It should be up to the planning board and its engineer to decide if this is protecting or not protecting. Excuse me. 3.10.4b provides that low-impact development site planning and design strategies must be used to maximize, to maximum extent practical in order to reduce the generation of stormwater runoff for both new development and redevelopment. LID site planning, Jim's already addressed that, so I don't need to cover LID versus other techniques. 3.10.4c requires that all stormwater treatment areas should be planted with native plantings appropriate for the soil, for the site conditions, and be in sufficient numbers and density to prevent soil erosion and achieve the water quality treatment requirements of the section. Again, there are no specific standards or criteria, leaving the discretion of municipal officials unrestricted and perhaps without appropriate training or knowledge to know what's a native planting and is it good for this area. So is every project that has to come in and get approval on one of these permits going to have to engage in major landscape architecture and then go to the Conservation Commission for their expertise and have a discussion about whether these native plantings, if they're available, if they're so they will survive, and if they're servicing the purpose of the requirement, which is preventing soil erosion and achieving water quality treatment. I would just urge care in requiring native plantings. A suggestion is good, but a requirement is a problem. 3.10.4e requires there be no direct untreated discharges of salt storage areas to receiving waters. Perfectly understandable. And that runoff from snow storage areas shall enter treatment areas before being discharged to receiving waters or allowed to infiltrate into the groundwater. The way this reads is if you have a snow storage area, and that includes anything, any disturbance over 15,000 square feet, so it might be a long driveway, you're storing your snow typically on the side or maybe in the back of where the pavement is. You can't just infiltrate. That's what we all do. Now, I understand when you got salt and you're pushing it off a parking lot of a commercial parking area. The planning board does a great job here. Where's the snow storage? What's your treatment of it? We don't want it going into a brook. But this goes a little too far in my book of regulations. 3.10.4f requires that runoff be directed into recessed, vegetated landscape areas designed for treatment or filtration to the MEP. Recessed, vegetated, and landscape areas is a little vague. What is vegetation and landscaping? I think if you just leave it to BMP design, that's really what we're talking about. Engineer to engineer, they all know what the state manual says about BMP treatment. Why does the town have to try to create a problem for itself? 3.10.4g requires the runoff shall not be discharged from the development site to municipal drainage systems, privately owned drainage systems, whether enclosed, open drainage, and shall not be discharged to surface water bodies or wetlands in excessive volumes discharged. Many sites make use of wetlands and existing surface water bodies, whether they're swamps, marshes, small seasonal water bodies for drainage, and most of these can accept stormwater drainage without impact to anyone. I would ask you to think about that, particularly in a lot of your areas where there are marshes or wetlands and they don't particularly directly drain. There is some analysis that could be done as to the potential impact, but many of these serve as proper filtration systems. Again, I leave it to the engineer to discuss that more, and you want to discuss it with Lou, but I'm urging you to take a look at that section, 310.4.g. 310.4h requires runoff from impervious surfaces be treated to achieve 80% total of TSS and 50% removal of nitrogen. It's a pretty burdensome requirement for small developments. 310.4j requires physical, biological, and chemical integrity of receiving water shall not be degraded from stormwater runoff from the development site. Again, it says that you shouldn't degrade it, but the previous reg I said they can't receive it. So I think that could be addressed in some rewrite. 310.4.1 provides the design of the stormwater management system shall take into account upstream and upgradient runoff that flows onto the site and provide this for contribution of runoff. And my reading of it is that if it is flowing onto the property now, even if it's flowing off the site in some direction, and that's an existing condition, it cannot continue to flow in its current pattern. Instead, you must pick up whatever somebody has been giving you for years and years, and you've been passing on for years and years, and now, under this regulation, you must treat it, which means you're creating a treatment system for someone else's water that you've just been passing on. Not always gonna happen, not very often, we hope, but that's the requirement that I think is harsh and confiscatory. 310.4, appropriate erosion and sediment control measures shall be installed prior to any prior soil disturbance, and the area disturbance kept to a minimum. There's no standard as to what these requirement means. Again, I think you can just stick with BMPs. 310.4 begins with the words, every effort shall be made, and that could be the same type of wording for what I just said. Every effort shall be made to keep the disturbance to a minimum. In this subsection, it requires that every effort be made to use pervious parking spaces as an alternative to impervious asphalt or concrete for all general and overflow parking areas. This is a substantial deviation from typical development regulation and your regulations. Town should have a clear understanding what it's proposing. There should be some further definition of the regulations as to what is acceptable as to pervious parking. I leave it to the parking expert to tell you the drawbacks, the pluses, the pervious parking. You know, sometimes it's okay to have lattice pervious parking or even pervious asphalt, and sometimes it's not. But this says every effort shall be made. So I think you could change the word for consideration should be given, something like that. 3.10.4 P begins with the words whenever practicable. I always hate those kind of words. Native site vegetation shall be retained, protected, or supplemented. Native site vegetation. Not even native plantings or native shrubbery. Native site vegetation. We're back to some terrible stuff that should be removed. 3.10.5 requires that in determining the stormwater requirements for development projects, the percentage of the site which is covered by existing impervious areas must be calculated. Then under subsection B, those sites having less than 40%, the stormwater management requirements would be the same as other new development projects, with the distinction that the applicant can meet them either on-site or off-site. It's a pretty restrictive requirement in my opinion, but I leave the comment up to the engineer. I think BMPs, again, would be the better answer. 3.10.6 is the description of how off-site mitigation could be allowed, but under this subsection, the restrictions make it almost impossible to find an area where the planning board might be satisfied for off-site mitigation. And so I think you want to allow off-site mitigation, but I think you want to loosen the reins a little bit here. 3.11.1 describes the erosion and sediment control plan and sets forth minimum design requirements that seem like an overreach, pointing out in particular a design of describing and showing how uncontaminated water is going to be diverted around disturbed areas, how infiltration and groundwater recharge will be maximized, and how on-site construction waste and materials be properly managed. Is that the business the planning board wants to be in? And if not, it's going to be the road agent, building inspector, I'm not sure. Someone's going to have take a look at the plan, take a look at the site, determine if groundwater infiltration is a good answer for diversion of this clean water while the construction's going on. 3.11.2 has some sections which set forth required information which seemingly is unnecessary, such as subsection C2 requiring all existing vegetation, including trees, tree lines, canopy layer, shrub layer, ground cover, and trees of the caliper of 12 inches or longer, noting specimen trees in forest communities must be constructed. I don't need to go on. Topographic features in this erosion control plan must include existing and proposed contours at intervals no greater than 1 foot, with spot elevations where needed. Why not make it a reasonable number for topographic contours for this particular plan? Section 3.12 contains the requirements of the operation and maintenance plan, which is imposing an extremely heavy burden upon the applicant in that the plan must, among other things, list all easements, include an estimated operation and maintenance budget, maintain a log of all operation and activities on site for 3 years, including inspections, repair, replacement, and disposal, which details about the type of material and the disposal location. There seems to be a pretty detailed requirement on these operations and maintenance plans for what would probably be catch base, stormwater detention basins. You know, maybe it's not that difficult to estimate, well, we have to spend $500 to cut the grass every year, but you're asking for someone to make these reports. That means somebody has to be evaluating whether it's a fair budget, evaluating whether it's a good report. Just be very careful what you pass. 3.12.3 requires the property owner provide the planning board an annual report, which must be prepared and stamped by a New Hampshire licensed professional engineer. Don't want to take away Jim's business, but he has to document and certify performance of the required maintenance and providing assessment of overall system performance. Good if he designed it. Bad if he didn't, because your engineer now has to go back and review the design and determine, well, what was really designed here and is there compliance? You have a second set of eyes, second set of costs. It just seems to me, you've had it reviewed, you've had it designed, and I understand that the inspection and certification process is a good idea because you're asking the applicant to hire an engineer to tell the town he or she is in compliance. But remember, that is a very expensive process. And frankly, I haven't been through it in any other communities, so I can't say how regulated it is. But I can tell you, I live in Nashua. They have regulations that allow the city to inspect if they want to. If somebody complains, it's not being taken care of, there's a catch basin that's overflowing, if there's a stormwater basin that's not doing its function, the neighbors are gonna complain, and they come out and they do it. That's the way the system works. I would urge you to loosen the reins a little bit here. Section 3.12.4 requires that the O&M plan shall include procedures for using dedicated funds. I'm not sure what that means, but suggests to me, because the next words are establishing an escrow account. So the homeowner, the developer, either one, is going to have to set up a pot of money, establish an escrow account, have a plan for it, and develop a maintenance contract to ensure long-term maintenance of this and tie it to this escrow. Somebody's got to do the work, somebody's got to set it up, somebody's got to monitor it to make sure they're doing it. 3.12.5 requires O&M plan be recorded. I don't find fault with that, just the language suggests, again, on the deed. In Nashua and many other communities, it's simply it's what they call a stormwater easement plan. I mean, a stormwater easement, and it just says, hey, the homeowner gives an easement to the municipality to do whatever they have to do, if they have to do it to enforce this. I think it could just be worded. 3.12.6 requires an annual report to the planning board by long-term operators. I'm not sure the definition of that, whoever that may be. Does the planning board really want to read an annual report with all the documents about all the inspection and maintenance completed on the stormwater system for every project that has been found? I don't know who else is going to do it, but I would suggest it's probably not the planning board. It may fall to the lucky road agent, or the lucky town engineer, or the lucky building inspector, or a brand new employee. But I don't think the planning board wants that. 3.12.6 requires, that's the line I just got. 3.13.3 is part of the site inspection and final report requirements. Says that a permittee shall conduct and document all inspections of all erosion and sediment control measures, no less than weekly and prior to any following anticipated storm events. This is a full-time inspection person out there on the site, documenting, reporting, and then required submittal of monthly reports to the planning board in the format of I just urge you not to take on more than you need to in this instance. 3.13.4 requires routine inspections and sets forth a very detailed schedule of when those inspections should occur, frankly micromanaging the process to the worst degree that I can imagine. Not only that, but under 3.13.5, the inspections must be performed by an independent, third-party licensed professional engineer. So these inspections go on for multiple years, and they go on regular, periodic dates. So this is after the fact. You're going to have a lot of work in front of you. That's all I'm saying. Finally, 3.14 sets forth all of the details of the certificate of completion, and 3.14.1 in particular requires that upon completion of the project, the applicant is responsible for certifying the completed project in accordance with the approved plans and specs, and shall provide regular inspection reports sufficient to document compliance. This is a burden. Point 5 requires that the certificate of completion, a self-certification by a property owner, and I don't mean to suggest that some property owners might not do the same type of inspection as others, but that's a fact of life. Must then be recorded, that is, the self-certification by the property owner must be recorded on the deed for the property. Again, probably poor wording, but I don't know what they're gonna be recording. They're gonna call me and say, you need a document to go on record. All right, here's the certification. I certify, I've inspected, it looks good, sign it, it's on record. What does that do for anybody? It means that if you find that this system isn't working, you can go back and say to the guy who certified it, okay, you lied. And now, no, I didn't. When I checked, it was working. It's just not working now. These are just practical things that I know as a lawyer, if you pass this, I'm gonna hear from you. I'm gonna hear from you, Steve. So I'm giving you the benefit of my comments, which I suggest, I think you need some more work on this. I think that it's a necessary item, it's a necessary ideal, and it's a very good idea so that you have some regulation of your own town, as opposed to saying, well, just kind of hop on the AOT and that's 100,000, what is it, 100,000 square foot regulation, and that's sufficient. Well, it's not always sufficient, and when I come in here listening to site plans and engineers, your town engineer looks at the VMP design, and so far, we're not letting stuff go into the water. But we really need another layer of this extent. And I will add that under the federal regs, in my opinion, you do need all of this. You have to establish a plan, but this is a cookie cutter that comes, I've seen it reduced in bigger municipalities. I've seen it in some small municipalities that just ignore it. And so I would urge you not to pass something that can't handle in this town and is unnecessary. So I apologize for taking all this time. I'm going to hand this sheet in so you have it, but I think that there's some redrafting and some cutting back that could be done, and happy to review it and comment it again if you make changes to it. I hope you do. There is a document that is very helpful, as a matter of fact, called the Stormwater Phase 2 Compliance Assistance Guide. It was published a long time ago, but it's out there, and it gives you options of how to design these stormwater things. And I know it's only too easy to hire a consultant and say, give me a set of regulations that you've done for another community. But this is your community. This is your planning board, your residents. I don't think you need this kind of document that you're considering doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Charles North, 401 Charles Bancroft Highway, so I had Morgan and Jim come in to review this stuff. But I think it's critical that the board considers, I mean, the cost of these things that these guys have been saying. You know, the road agent couldn't even get one more guy. You know, there isn't enough people in this town to ever, I don't know if you'll ever get them approved. I mean, you couldn't get a new cruiser. You know, we just don't approve things of budgets to spend. And this is gonna cost a lot of money, not just as a developer, me, it's gonna cost the town a lot of money. And I look at the, you know, when I was fortunate enough to move into town over 45 years ago, and Joan moved into town that long ago, we could afford to buy a house. But you young guys, are your kids or your grandkids gonna be able to live in this town? If we keep adding all these layers of expenses, I mean, it's already crazy, you know, what we have to go through to build a house or to build a road. We need it. And then I say, let's look at the roads and the things that we've built over the last 45 years. Where do we have problems? I mean, we don't, do we?
No, nothing major.
You know, what do we have for problems?
We don't. Nothing.
It's been working pretty well, what we have, using the state regulations and the regulations we have. So now we're gonna add this whole layer of crap, as far as I'm concerned, and it's not gonna give us any more, and there is not gonna be anybody to inspect it and enforce it anyway. So, that's my, you know, and I think we need to look at cost of things so that our grandkids can afford to live in Litchfield. Right now, they can't. I don't know if they can. I mean, I have 400 employees, and there's not many that can afford to buy a house in the town of Litchfield, and a lot of them make well over $100,000 a year. So, it's just too expensive. I mean, and we need to look at that throughout the whole state, you know, and even this 15,000 square feet, I mean, everybody's talking about letting everybody build, or new regulations from the state that you can build an extra house on the lot, so that somebody else a family member can live there. That would get involved in that, if you adopt this stuff. So, that's all. We just need to look at cost of things and who's gonna pay for it, and who's actually gonna do it. You know, I can tell you one that I do, you know, across from Mel's, the Fish and Game, they don't even have any right. They made us give them an easement on a lot. We didn't touch any wetlands, we didn't do anything, but they require us to give them an easement on the wetland. For what? We didn't touch it, we're not near them. But rather than push back, we gave it to them. But, you know, at the end of the day, doesn't matter, they're never gonna look at it, no one's ever gonna go and inspect it, they're never even gonna know what we do out there. So we give them the easement, but who's gonna look at it? I mean, let's be practical about it. You know, the same thing at Rose Meadow. They wanted all these easements, okay, but I say to Jim, give it to them. Who's ever gonna look at it? They don't have enough people.
They don't.
Right, so that's what we're dealing with. Until there's a problem. You know, then somebody will come when there's a problem. But we have that right now if there's a problem. Whether there's an easement on there or not, there's still things you can do and can't do in the wetlands. And if you are, you're gonna be caught and someone's gonna have to be a problem. But that's the end of but that's where we're coming from. Where I'm coming from, why I got here.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your input on this. Certainly, these regulations are quite extensive, as you see. So with that, so this is a workshop on stormwater management. We've heard from the public who's here this evening. Does the board have any questions for these folks? Anything that they want to add? And this is open to everybody because it is a workshop. We're not, you know, so, I mean, it is a public meeting, hearing. So if anybody has any suggestions or anything.
I don't have any questions, but I do fully agree with a lot of what the engineer is saying over here, and also the attorney. I think us going to the under an acre stuff is gonna be way beyond our means. So I think we should definitely trim, clean up, and make this a little more straightforward before we even think about passing what we have here now, so.
I believe that's what was brought forward to begin with.
I'm just,
We didn't,
Same thing.
we said, let's not go there.
yeah.
And it was changed.
Joan, do you
I
have
agree completely.
an idea over the last 30 or 40 years, how many of these small single-home projects that have ever come before the planning board to get beyond the building inspector?
Not many.
Yeah,
But now
I mean,
now
it-
they would have to, though, according, if you stay with this.
if you stayed with this, they would. But, yeah, we just haven't seen them, and the big nut that I see here is the follow-up is just this big elephant in the room, it really is. And I talked to Kevin a lot about detention basins that were built 40 years ago. That some of them get taken care of, some of them don't. Even what constitutes taking care of them. I read stuff about cutting trees down and stuff. I got on following the states. I was down here with Roland years ago, and I was down there with Jack a few years ago. There's trees growing in it, but I've never seen water to get up to the grade. They were over-designed years ago with the technology. We didn't have auto or HydroCAD back then. So they were all over-designed. And to have to go out and even clean these things out, to have Kevin send his guys out, ridiculous. No, the water didn't even flow.
I'm okay with over-design.
Yeah.
But a lot of some of the comments you made about 1 foot contours.
For my job, I'm okay with it.
The testing of the water, one of my concerns there, a degradation, that clause in degradation, that you could easily have an abutter, or not even an abutter, anyone could come in and say, I think it's degraded, so I want you to test it. You test it, and you get, who tests it? Engineers don't test it, you got a chemist out there, biologists out there, and they say, no, it's not degraded. 2 weeks later, you get another letter, I think it's degraded. Over and over, and it's just, I don't know, a tool that could be used to prevent development. But a lot of the comments you're saying, I didn't look at the little one, the 17,000 square foot and under, because the building inspector sees those, really. And the big ones, everything we've been doing since AOT came on has been working fine.
Quality and quantity, you know, it's, a lot of it, stormwater is common sense. I don't want you to think we're not sensitive to, you know, the suggestion by the EPA. You're Kim, right, the town manager? I don't envy, I don't envy your position.
Yes,
You
we're under
want it to
order.
be, you want it to, you want
We're
it
under
to,
order.
Right.
that's
Yeah.
right. So, but, we're not insensitive to
By
that.
June 1st, June 30th.
I just think that a more reasonable set of regulations that's easy to understand and easy to apply is, I'd love to see you end up there. It is not easy. I have been involved in code rewrites. It's really hard to do. You know, Morgan and I just rattle off a whole bunch, you know, you almost have to break it down with a small subcommittee or a group, and break it down and say, okay, we're gonna just do the first 3 pages tonight. But believe me, it will take you all of 2 hours to get through that. And then, you know, break it down and continue to go, and eventually you'll get through it. But it's not easy, and I don't envy that task. But, and you know, lastly, the big projects, Lou mentioned Rose Meadows, where we have anywhere from 4 to 5 different treatment practices, and we have compliance with AOT, and thankfully we've got a wonderful contractor to execute the design. But you know, those projects can go through that alteration of terrain process and be permitted and really work. And I think that, you know, I think it was Morgan said, you know, as you just said, well, the system kind of works really the way it is right now, so. Anyway, I just wanted to mention, we're not insensitive to the burden that you've been put under.
And I would add to that, you know, we know you have to have a deadline, you have to have something done, and I just, I'm not volunteering to make a cut, but there are things you can pick out of there based upon what I commented. Line them right out and just say, we're not gonna pass this right now. And it would still be compliant, because there is a lot of flexibility in the regulation that requires communities to adopt something. They're just looking for you to do something. And I tell you to walk before you run, crawl before you walk. But, you know, I would be prepared to line out some of those suggestions totally and say, all right, we're gonna adopt some, gonna leave out the under an acre for now, we're not gonna regulate that at all. And then some of this inspection stuff, we're gonna reduce the requirement, and some of the reports, we're gonna reduce the requirement, and maybe the plan, let's see, maybe Jim can make a comment or two about some of the things that wouldn't have to be on a plan for a stormwater. Some of it's gonna be on a site plan, so it's not a big deal, but some of it is add-on, you know, delineating between the design plan and the construction plan, and all that is really more burdensome for this municipality, and not particularly for an applicant of a big project. They do that, but very burdensome for a municipality. So I'd urge you to carefully consider maybe just lining out some of that inspection, maintenance, reporting, etc. If you have to have something, if you feel you need to have a reporting mechanism, just make it less frequent and less onerous on all applicants, whether they're commercial, a developer of 250 plus townhomes, or a small strip center, or just a homeowner. It's still a burden, and it's still expensive. And I'm not sure what it's accomplishing.
You know, maybe Morgan, projects an acre and above, an as-built when complete, and a statement of compliance from the applicant. And Kim, I know you're from Nashua, and in Nashua, on particular projects, Morgan alluded to it, the applicant needs to grant permission to the city and the town to be able to, if there is a downstream degradation and a problem, that they have the right to enter the property and identify if the source of the problem is coming from that site, and then it's up to the owner to fix that problem. In other words, if there was terrible turbidity in a water course downstream, and you found out it was this construction project that, you know, wasn't paying attention to their silt fence, and when it rained, everything got in the brook, it'd be up to them to remedy that. You have the right to go onto the property and ascertain that. And so even just those three pieces, the as-built, the statement of compliance, and the easement granted to the town, those are easy things and part of any responsible site development, and we do those elsewhere. The sledgehammer on the fly is a good one, Morgan, can I use that?
It also gives the town the ability to make those corrections, and the owner shall be liable. So, you know, if you have a particularly sensitive area, and you do have some very sensitive areas in Litchfield, as all municipalities, if the road agent was called out there because there's an erosion, I remember there was a erosion on one of the condos going into the river, and they're called out, and the town has to do it to stop the erosion, because the feds are saying it's your fault if you don't do something, you can do it, but under an easement that's drafted properly, once you do it, property owner shall be liable. So it gives you the right to then initiate an action against the owner and get a lien. You know, I can't think of too many times that's happened, because it's such a weapon. Hey, look we found the problem, this is the problem, fix it, or we'll fix it, and you'll pay 3 times what it would cost you to fix it.
They plug a downstream catch basin or something, you know, and the town doesn't want to have the burden.
You just want to have a weapon to have, really, because that's your only protection for pollution.
Let me turn to the consultant. I know you've heard a lot this evening from this end.
Now we're gonna go line by line, every single time. No, I'm just-
What, I mean, in your perspective, in terms of, you know, these regulations, are there things that should be in here or should not be in here that you feel that would be appropriate for Litchfield? What's your take on?
So my very high, my name's Nick Christopher, I'm with Comprehensive Environmental CEI, and we're hired to help the town comply with MS4 regulations. So the regulation as currently written right now took the town's existing regulation with a 15,000 square foot disturbance and has some proposed additions into it for that 1 acre or more. So all of those additions for that 1 acre or more come from a standard document that was developed by the Southeast region. It's referenced to the permit, Southeast region, someone or other. And It is a starting point. It is not thou shalt do all of these things and copy and paste the language. So the good news is that probably 80% of the comments that you proposed tonight, I think, or more, I certainly think we can work with. So, you know, that's the good news. There are a couple that we probably can't, like I know you mentioned the 80%, the 50% removals.
You gotta have.
That's one of those things that, you know, kind of needs to be done. It has to be in there in some capacity. A lot of the other things that you brought up as far as, you know, even as far as like defining waivers. You know, we went back and forth at one point at one of the meetings and said, well, should we come up with a list of 20 different things for waivers? Or should we just leave it very generic? And as a consultant, I'm not really good at coming up with that answer. I try and leave that to the boards or an attorney. You kind of have a much better sense of what types of things should be very specific. Like I know you brought up some of the definitions that this should be defined, this should be defined, this should not be defined. So I'm 100% okay with this being a working document, and I'm looking forward to getting both of your, it sounds like you both have itemized comments in there. Perfect, awesome. So that's great, that's great. So I mean, that's my perspective. So, you know, the way the permit is written is there's about a paragraph about this long, and it says, this is what you need to do. You need to have, you need to require as-bills, for instance. Okay, well, that's fine. So, but then how do you require as-bills? So what is the process of submitting an as-bill? And that's the hard part to figure out at a local level. Is it, you need to provide an as-bill, or, well, what is the mechanism that triggers when you need to provide an as-bill? Who do you need to provide the as-bill to? Who's recording the as-bill and in what capacity? And that is the piece that at the local level, that it can be difficult to do. You know, again, like I said, my responsibility is to make sure you're complying with MS4. So I guess as far as, and Lou, you and I worked, I know you brought up a couple of comments that I think Lou, he's a very smart guy, has actually addressed a lot of them already.
So like as-bills, we already have to do.
We have as-bills.
We already do them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the final approval,
Sure.
is submitting as-bills.
And you submit them to
The town.
planning board?
Yeah.
Okay.
The planning
Yeah,
board.
I do a spot check. They typically will take the original design plans, put inverts on the pipes and curb opening, stuff like that. And I go out there and, yep,
Yeah.
Oop, you missed some bounds over here, okay. Week later, the bounds are in.
Yeah. So I guess from my perspective, what would be easiest is if the town or whoever, if you want to take a stab at going through and saying, we don't want this, or can we simplify this, blah, blah, blah. I am happy to go through and say, yup, not a problem, yup, not a problem, not a problem. Let's keep this piece in. So I think at least I think we can kind of work together on cutting it down. Because there is a lot of gray area in what makes the town in compliance. And EPA has kind of done it in my opinion, EPA has kind of done it on purpose, that they've left it at the local level, rather than saying, you need to take this Litchfield and have the same document in place as Manchester, as Nashua, as Portsmouth. So they've left it up to this local level. They provided a standard template to begin with, which is what we're working off of and what a lot of other communities have begun to work off of. But there is certainly wiggle room into what you actually include in your final regulations and still be in compliance. I guess.
Is there a community in New Hampshire similar, whether it's a Hollis or a, I don't know what, you know, a kind of an agricultural New Hampshire town that has these regulations already in place that you're familiar with, and would it be worth taking a peek at those?
I can look a little bit more in detail. I do more of this work in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
full disclosure. I do some work with Sandown. I believe Sandown has relatively similar regulations. I also do work with Manchester,
Yeah,
who's different,
sure.
substantially,
Sure.
as you can imagine. It is really up to the community. I have seen communities go both directions. I have seen communities that have passed 2 pages of regulations. And they say they're in compliance. In my opinion, they're not really in compliance, and I don't think they're ticking all the boxes. However, ultimately, it is the community that is certifying, yes, I am in compliance with MS4, it's not me. So at the local level, at some point, that decision needs to be made that we feel as though we are in compliance with the MS4 regulations, or certainly the intent of the MS4 regulations, and this is what we have done. I think certainly, once you start, anything on the 15,000 square feet, I believe, is unchanged from the existing regulations, correct? Lou, I don't think we changed any of those.
I didn't really pay attention to that section.
Because I think a lot of the comments that were first were,
That was 1 acre and 15, down to 15,000. 15,000 you don't regulate, but 1 acre down to 15,000, that's all new regulations.
those are the same. The town currently regulates 15,000 square feet and up.
Cause we had.
But not to
nothing
the
less than
extent
we-
of that document.
No, not to the extent of that.
Not, well,
No, not.
do you have the highlights? The highlight document?
The
or
ones
not?
that John gave me, but not to that extent. We've never done that to that.
I did double check the current regs to this document, and I found some similarities, but again, I thought this was a much heavier document. But to Lou's point, how many applications have you had?
That's why I didn't spend time on it.
Yeah.
I think we should have nothing else.
Well, I mean, it's just something I wanna throw out to the board, because there are existing regulations in place that regulate 15,000 square feet, and we have added things at that 1 acre threshold and above, but that 15,000 square feet to the 40,000, that 1 acre, is not changing. All that stuff is, like, you read all the deed stuff, all that kind of stuff, that is in the town's existing regulations.
So, that's why we changed it, so that it would mesh with the existing town regulations.
You should change that one too.
So,
Is the current,
All
are the
for
current,
it. All for it.
are the current regulations being enforced properly?
Well,
So, yeah.
there's nothing to enforce, because there's no projects that have come online
Yeah.
in decades,
So
really.
like that way.
Even the 15,000
We can
plus
hope.
square feet?
Hasn't happened.
Well, I think the big difference is this ordinance talks about disturbance of land.
Yes.
You have regulations that govern a site plan regulation or a subdivision
Right.
regulation. And that's what your regulations are contained in. But this opens up the category of, you're not asking for a site plan or a subdivision. You just wanna go out and change your earth. And that's what this regulation does. That was the point I was making. Like, just leave it in your site plan, right? Whatever you have, you have. But you don't have to regulate that size of land under the federal regulations. So you can just ignore it completely. You don't even have to have it in here. Don't adopt whatever it's in, whatever you're adopting as a site plan regulation. But now you're asking it to apply to Richard Charbonneau, who wants to make a 15,000 square foot driveway, pool, and play area. And he's gotta come in with all this plan and this monitoring, and that's the objection. That's my point, not necessarily whether the regulations are good or bad, but they're bad for people who don't have to come in for a site plan. And the site plan, as you know, regulates non-residential, doesn't, or multifamily and non-residential. It doesn't regulate a homeowner, it doesn't regulate a single family. This does. That's the huge difference.
Is there an exemption for agriculture?
Agriculture is exempted.
Yeah.
Agriculture is exempted, yeah.
Yeah.
But, that was my point about it. You know, the regulations, wherever they came from, fine, but this is, again, not part of the site plan. This is just your average disturbance of earth. So now roll to the bigger. Well, let's then examine that with a fine tooth comb. Anything over an acre. Now, the big issue is, do the site plan regulations match up, and are your requirements the same? And if they are, you know, you might have to tweak language a little bit here or there and make sure it's not duplicating what your site plan is. But in your site plan regs, you do not have all the reporting and all of the monitoring and all of the post-construction compliance certification and follow-up monitoring, and that's a very costly situation. That's really what the point was.
Yeah, I don't even know, there's a lot of stuff there you couldn't really certify to. I don't know what you do.
Well, that 50%, 80%,
Yeah.
I had that conversation with Nick, that the only basis I could think of to really come close to compliance with that or would be the stormwater, New Hampshire UNH stormwater studies they do. That says if you use this kind of a device, these are the results you're gonna get.
Right.
So you don't need to send scientists out there to confirm that. It's already been studied. So that's what I looked at, that
Yeah, there's some language in there that EPA has as well about a tool that you use, and it's published by EPA, and it's essentially performance curves based on the type of BMP and what volume and what stormwater trees and et cetera. So it's not you don't go out and actually collect sampling, it's a model.
well, if you have language in there that even implies or might imply it could, I just get concerned that people come out of the woodwork who don't want a project or want to punish a developer for doing a project. They're just going to start piling, got to do this, got to do that, got to do that, and for no other reason than could be harassment.
So, like I said, in my opinion, my job is to make sure you're complying with MS4. And so any of the 15,000 square foot stuff, that's up to the board and whatever. You don't need it, you don't need that 15,000 square feet.
You don't need it under an acre.
Right. Correct.
So I guess right at this point, are you adopting something tonight or?
No.
You guys are agreeing.
No.
I guess if it's up to the board, if you wanted to, that when you do come up with things, if we give them to Morgan and Jim, I'll pay their time, but at least get back to you guys, so we're just seeing it from a different angle. You have you guys, and we get this thing down to something small that you're in compliance, but it makes sense.
No, I think that, I mean, that's
I'm
reasonable.
okay with doing that if the board's okay with them working on the project.
Me too.
Kim, I mean-
The most important part, again, as I said, is the inspection and maintenance. So if Nick is able to take a good look at that and say, what do I need to be compliant? Because you have more experience in what's been judged as compliant. I, of course, as a lawyer, would argue your current ordinances are compliant. But he would know, based on his experience with people adopting these, what's the minimum you can get away with on your maintenance and inspection and reporting. That to me is critical for this town. And that's gonna add expense. What's the minimum you can get away with on the design plans, on the required design plans? That's really critical. That's the $20,000 item that you just got.
Now, the only question I have on that, if you're saying minimums, we're working on 2017 regulations. When are they moving to 2020 and 2024? So we're at the minimum, we're gonna be back here in 2 years doing the exact same thing, adding on. Now, the map, the MS4 map that you're looking at is probably increasing about 30% within, I'll show you the new map, and it increases about 30%, so.
But they probably won't get it done in time, so if we take care of what we got right now.
No, I'm just.
We'll be in another 5 years or 10 years, I mean.
Well, I mean, is it gonna be? I mean, Nick, you would know maybe more than anybody. I don't know. I just wanna throw caution to that.
So EPA was targeting releasing a draft permit at the end of 2023. Last I heard, they're targeting releasing a draft permit at the end of this coming year. And all likelihood I'll be before you in a year from now saying they're targeting.
Next year, yeah.
So in any case, say they release at the end of this year. So December 31st. Then it goes out for public comment. You get, I forget if it's 3 weeks or 6 weeks. And the last permit came out and EPA got something like 879 pages of comments, literally from all kinds of consultants and industry, and as they should. I mean, this is a big deal.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely, it's a big deal. So they had 6 week comments, then they have like 9 months to respond to the comments, which is more than that. So now you're already a year out from the end of this year. Then say that they finalized the permit that day. They probably won't. They will probably go out to another round of comments with the revised permit. So now you're another year beyond that. Now say they finalize it, then there's like another year probably until it's in effect. So in all likelihood, you're 3 years out, like.
Okay, just,
So let's deal with what we have to today.
yeah, I'm just throwing caution, just saying, if Nick came back and said to us, well, within a year, we're gonna have new standards, we gotta start thinking about that.
And we don't know,
Yeah.
I'm hoping we don't have to touch the regulations again. Cause this is by far my least favorite part of the permit. I'd much rather be doing designs or something like that, or, field work, it's a lot more interesting, the regulations are a little more painful.
So I guess my question to the board is, as Nick comes up with his, you're making changes now, right, the next document you come up with, can they be shared with Lou and Morgan and Jim so that we can all comment it, to get it done in the time you need to?
Kim,
In the essence of time, I think, I don't know, Morgan, if you did multiple copies, if this one copy.
You did.
Okay, if we could pass those out so that the board members could go look at it, think about it, and, Nick will do the same, Karen and I will do the same, and let's come to some consensus. Do I have any problem with asking for Morgan's help? No way!
As long as we can accept the help, I'm game taking, so.
I play well with others, I'm happy to defer, because
You take a look at them, you make whatever you have, and then, hopefully we're distilling it down.
I'm the MS4 compliance guy. You're the ones that are gonna have to be complying with the regulations, and you're gonna be having to enforce the regulations.
well, I agree, and I think,
Or you,
Happy to give you my 2 cents, every lawyer likes that.
Well, we're gonna be back to do other things, and
Do you have enough, Joe?
perfect.
yeah, I think that makes sense.
Because I think until people really have a chance to, we've heard the comments, but until they really have a chance to read it and comprehend it, look at this in comparison to this, we can look at, some other towns.
Right.
If you do away with the under an acre, a good 3-4 pages of that, I was just highlighting why you don't want to. You could just, 3.2 to 3.7 goes away, now you're just looking at 3.8 on, really, so.
Well, I don't think you should delete it. I think Nick should say, for projects under an acre, it is incumbent upon the applicant to follow, the reasonable BMPs and be responsible with their land disturbance, because that way it gives the hook to the building inspector or to somebody at the town, if they're not, to be able to say, hey, you know what? We have a regulation, you're not compliant, so clean up your house.
Yeah, you don't want them paving 15,000 square feet and then putting a trench right into the road.
Or to the next neighbor, on a subdivision.
That's correct.
or somebody comes and does something and doesn't put up any silt fence and it's a mess. You still wanna be able to regulate it. Right, but there's always gonna be people that aren't gonna do it right. Unfortunately.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Be back.
Okay, appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Excellent feedback.
Yes.
Thank you.
You can't go out that way. Doesn't anything
Good night.
Right.
Do we have any history on,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
do we have any history on the regulations that we currently have for under, or 15,000?
So where did, when we were sitting, when we came that first night, I know because we had discussed it and we said, let's not do anything less than an acre.
Mm-hmm.
Cause that's the federal, and then somehow but I don't remember, was it because that's what our current regulations had in it, we felt we need to be cohesive?
I think so.
I think that was the idea.
Do we know?
We don't need
To
to.
Morgan's point,
Yeah, we don't need to, it's just,
It's under the site plan regulations, I'm kind of looking at it here. But again, when you do a subdivision, all the lots are surveyed and everything else is done, so whether you get a builder that comes in or you sell a lot to an individual who then hires a builder to come in, a lot of this stuff has already been taken care of.
yeah,
And when you-
it's,
and when you get into an acre or less, a building lot, even if it's a 2-acre building lot, and they just come and put a house on and a above-ground pool in the backyard with a play set and a driveway and da-da-da, we don't really get involved in it. The building inspector does, but
according to these
Road agent.
regulations, the planning board would, right? Or our, who we designate, so that would
But
probably be.
again, it just hasn't been an issue. That's the whole thing. It just has, in Litchfield, has not been an issue of ignoring them, put it that way. If we're, you know, we're not out there every day looking at what's going on, you're kind of ignoring it. But there's never been an issue. The bigger sites, and it was only a few years ago when this happened, the work that I did had to do more with subdivisions and road construction. And then when it came to some of these bigger sites that came online, like the LQ auto thing,
Whereas,
building inspector said, can you take care of the site issues and I'll take care of the building issues? And I said, sure. So with these larger sites, I've been going on, and it's just to comply, like Corning Farm, okay? I don't go out there and inspect the roads like I do if it's gonna be a town road. If it's a town road, I have samples of the material they're bringing in, lab tests, I have compaction tests out there, on and on and on. But for Corning Farm, town's never gonna own it, or all these homeowners, the 55 and older communities. I'll go down here and say, yeah, this is where the road should be, and this is the catch basins and stuff like that.
what about LKQ, because they were bordered by a stream and the river? And was there any runoff from the parking area or?
There was, during construction, there was an issue because they had the 1.5 to 1 side slopes with all the stone
Yeah.
adjacent to the brook.
Yeah.
And there was a pipe coming across. There were a few issues during construction they had to deal with. But other than that, everything down below was all taken care of with a detention pond prior to going to the river. Now, the thing with the Merrimack River, any project next to the Merrimack River, when I worked in Hooksett many, many years ago, and they start talking about volume or peak flow rate going into the Merrimack, I started doing some research on the Merrimack River. And it takes 24 to 48 hours for that river to peak by the time it gets to central New Hampshire. So I'm thinking, why are we requiring these developers to put in these detention ponds to scale back the peak flows until the big rush comes down and we're still putting out more than the site down here would be all dried up if we didn't have a detention basin. It's like flushing toilets, you know? So I went down to a Hudson Planning Board meeting and I described it as a bathtub. And why do you hold all the water back? And meanwhile, Merrimack River's doing this and you're holding water back.
Yeah.
Let it go. For sites that are close to the river. You got sites a long way away from the river. You have other things to deal with, existing culverts and stuff. But not if you're right along the river like Corning Farm or on and on. It doesn't make sense to me to detain water.
Well, it's the same.
For water quality, it's a different
Yes.
story.
Well, yeah, it's filtering, so.
For water quality, a different story, but the peak flow, it made it counterproductive to me to hold back a certain amount of water until the main river is peaking, and now we're gonna, jack a little bit more in there to make it worse.
yeah, I mean, I'd like to read Morgan's
Yeah.
comments
Yeah.
in detail
Yeah.
and, I mean, I
Well, I think in
highly
terms,
respect it.
yeah.
The offsite mitigation, I recommended, Nick, just throw that out, because you don't wanna get involved in having to monitor something offsite in the town of Manchester, city of Manchester, or town of Hudson, or over in Merrimack, so. I mean, the state did it, and I was doing the state contract, they would have offsetting wetland impacts for a major highway project, and they did allow you, if you filled 5 acres of wetland to build a new highway, you gotta go save 30 acres of wetland somewhere else and put it under permanent easement within the subcatchment area of wherever you're having the impact. They allowed you to do that, but the town of Litchfield doesn't want to get involved in off-site stuff. You have no control over it. I mean, it'll be in some deed, but who the hell's gonna be thinking about a plot of land in Hudson or Merrimack for off-site mitigation for Litchfield?
Yeah, I'm wondering where that degree came from.
Take that right out.
Was that right from the,
That was in your existing regs,
alright, yeah,
yeah.
so.
Never
I
happened.
think what we have here too is a little bit of problem is when Nick's trying to write these, looking at the, you know, EPA, what we need to be in compliance, and trying to marry it with existing regulations which may not be current. I mean, it may not actually be what you're doing either.
I mean, at least from my perspective, I like that we have it separated now.
Yeah.
Because the 15,000 square foot stuff, from a regulatory standpoint, you can do whatever you want. Cut as much as you want, and that's just your existing stuff, and maybe this is an opportunity to say, we haven't looked at this in 20 years, why is it in our regulations? And all of that stuff, none of it's required by EPA, so it can just go away. My stuff, so the stuff in yellow, again, that was copy and pasted from EPA's recommended ordinance that was developed by someone on the seacoast. And EPA says you need to be at least as stringent as that ordinance. Which, in my reading between the lines, doesn't necessarily mean it has to be letter for letter, word for word the same. There is allowed to be some interpretation, because then again, if you go back to the regulation themselves, like for instance, the regulations themselves say, the permittee shall require the submission of as-built drawings within a specified time frame not exceeding 2 years. That's all it says. So you don't necessarily need a paragraph about an as-built submittal. The inspections say like you need to have written procedures for inspections, and like that's it. So written procedures for site plan review, site inspections, and enforcement and sediment control measures. It needs to include who is responsible for site inspection as well as who is authority to implement the procedures. That is what's required by the permit. So as long as we can say, in my opinion again, in good faith, that says we're meeting these requirements of the permit, because we're doing this. Doesn't necessarily say the same thing as that, but we can say, well, it's at least as stringent. It just doesn't have quite as much detail maybe. I think you're okay.
But if it's an acre or more, Lou, you're going out and doing the site inspection, right?
Depends what's going on. I mean, somebody owns 5 acres of land, they want to put a house on it, I don't get involved.
Yeah, it wouldn't come for
The
subdivision.
It wouldn't even go, it wouldn't be before the board.
Right.
It's
The
submitted,
building inspector would.
It depends on
You wouldn't go that
disturbance.
thorough though. You don't be careful with the houses, the driveways, and that kind of stuff.
But again, it depends on disturbance, so if they're not clearing and they're not disturbing land, they're
well,
not
see,
pulled in.
the other thing about clearing, which is really interesting. If you go to any construction site, go over 255 Dairy Road, Rose Meadows. I mean, they've disturbed probably 40 acres of the land, maybe even more than that. And when I go out there and I'm checking for erosion control stuff, I go to the perimeter. And then areas that have direct access to a brook or a stream and make sure the erosion control measures are in place. Rose Meadows, Rick did a double layer. He did the silt fence, and I think every tree cut down there got mulched and got a whole stack of mulch in front of every silt fence. And first time I went out there, I had them add silt fence to one of the streams where they weren't developing out in the back, but they had cut the trees down. I said, you might as well put something here. And they did. A week later, they did. But to talk about if you disturb something at like 10,000 square feet or something that you gotta permanently seed it and grade it. Just, it doesn't happen, but it doesn't have to happen. Corning Farm, hey, right now, Corning Farm, from Route 3A down to the cornfield, is basically on the north side, all chewed up. But is it a problem? No. No.
Yeah, so the whole purpose of the MS4 is to protect water quality. That's the whole
Key.
one sentence of what all of this is about. So in order to protect water quality, you need to prevent pollutants from going into water bodies and prevent pollutants from going into a drainage system because eventually they go into water bodies. So to lose point, you need to regulate stuff, which is why you need to do things like build BMPs to treat water quality and eventually discharge. But then there's the other piece about, clearing and stuff like that, and Lou, to your point, right? If it's not leaving the site, and it's eventually gonna be restored, and it's not impacting water quality, it's not impacting the neighbors, not impacting anyone, to an extent, it's no harm, no foul.
That's been my approach.
I have a comment. So it's all about water quality, and I agree. Then why aren't they going after Manchester for combined sewer overflows? But how many years has it been, like 10, that they're still got combined sewer overflows?
Manchester's spending,
It's millions, I know.
Millions.
I know it's millions, but
It's ongoing.
it's
They
ongoing.
do, and they go
Been
after
ongoing for
Nassau
15
too.
years.
they've spent, I forget what their
Absolutely.
budget is, it's massive.
Yeah.
But they
I
still
think-
have it.
I
You're
believe,
right.
I believe,
It's an issue.
so I believe Manchester's current annual CSO related design budget, just design, I believe is $3 million. So then you figure $30 million, something like that annually for, and it's just numbers, don't quote me on those please, but it's in that ballpark.
It's huge. That's design. Yeah, construction is
Put the money
probably
towards that.
But I mean.
40 times that amount or 50 times that amount.
But Manchester kind of has a different issue. They're built out.
Oh, yeah.
We actually do the peer reviews, and we do peer reviews, but but they have a 5,000 square foot threshold, I think, for certain things, and they have a whole laundry list of things that they review for. We don't see a whole lot of projects that come in for an acre or more. There are some subdivisions here and there, maybe one a month, but I mean, you think Manchester, they must be doing
No.
20 of these a month or something like that, and
Yeah,
they're not.
Running out of room.
Yeah, okay. Just had to throw that in.
Sure.
But we have to be wary of time, 'cause we
Right,
are
right.
under an order,
Right,
so. What's our schedule going forward?
So we have the comments that were provided by Mr. Petropoulos and Attorney Hollis. I think those should be reviewed by the consultant, Lou. And I think taking those and then looking at what we have here in terms of the rules and regulations, and I agree, I think that some of the stuff in here is like, it's overkill. And I don't think it's necessary to, make the planning board or to have, people go out and do, these inspections. That doesn't make any sense. But I think it can certainly be, I think it can be whittled down, and if we can if we can sort of apply this, and look at this and see if we can apply this to this. I guess my question is gonna be, there has to be, in terms of the MS4 compliance, there's gonna have to be things that are gonna have to be part of it. Just the question is, what are those pieces? And also, the definitions. Do the definitions, do we need to maybe shore those up in terms of, like for example, we talked about the disturbance of land and so forth, those types of things. Yeah, does that, do we have to?
PA has a pretty standard.
Yeah, the new, if they are new definitions that I added so that they'd be highlighted, those are direct from the permit.
Okay.
So I've tried to make them consistent.
So we would wanna keep those in this, then?
I think the highlighted definitions, you will probably want to keep in there.
Okay,
You know, it's not to say we can't massage them a little bit. You know, we're not beholden to them being the same as MS4, just for consistency purposes, because we're trying to meet the MS4 requirements. We're trying to keep them consistent. I will tell you that there are many, many communities that they're not 100% consistent,
right,
and I think that's okay.
okay.
And what about?
You know, sorry, I mean, again, you know, I think if we can go back to EPA and say, hey, we did these regulations, it was reviewed by the entire planning board, 2 consultants and an attorney, you get a pretty strong case
Right.
that you're meeting the intent.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do we wanna do about the questions about, the comments about the deeds, stuff?
That's all just driven.
Yeah,
Cause they recommended that that something like an easement was provided instead, and that easement.
Right.
yeah,
Well, we,
I mean,
Again, I thought that came from the existing
Yeah,
regulations.
so what do you
Yeah,
wanna
that
do
would
about
be-
the existing regulations?
Well, I think you can go back and you can change, you can
Yeah.
have at it.
Another workshop for those another day.
well, I mean,
the one,
yeah,
the one that, when, God, it must have been over 30 years ago, working with Roland on the drainage stuff, and things have changed a lot as far as technology and how to evaluate and calculate drainage. So the references that are in here were current at the time it was written. The methodologies for doing drainage, the rational method, the New England Hills and Highland, I mean, these are all generally accepted methods, and now we have HydroCAD, all on computer, which allows you to stack different things going on, which you couldn't do with the other, we just couldn't do it by hand. So stuff like that, I wouldn't mind seeing upgraded to eliminate the old tried and true that worked for a generation, but now we're in a new generation. But HydroCAD's a New Hampshire product, guys up in Shakur have developed it.
I drove by the house.
The
That's,
house, yeah, they're in a house up there,
It's,
off Route 60.
If you ever pull up their website, I think it's the same as it was in like 1987. It's, seriously.
But the software is just great software, and everybody's using it, so it hasn't been an issue, but the regulation doesn't talk about it, because it didn't exist. So there's a few things I would put in there and talk
So
to Kevin.
looking
Here you go, this is.
back on
this
the
is the-
timeline,
CB liners, PVC liners
Yeah.
in the catch
It was
basin.
made
Yeah.
for
Look at all
geotech.
that.
you guys, you still
It's
have
nice,
another
it's
meeting,
nice that,
right?
so the
what's
next,
happened, a lot of them are getting
next planning board meeting is the
So they
21st.
came and they
So,
done a couple
but wait a minute,
roads,
why
and
not,
some of those liners are getting pulled out,
why
they're
not-
great.
Does the week of the
But they do get
27th,
pulled out,
you
you
wanna
gotta
have
be
a work
careful.
session that week of the 27th, like 30th or the 28th?
Certainly
The 21st,
could, if you wanted to. I'm not opposed
We
to
have-
that,
I
if no
mean,
one else
three
is.
things on the 21st.
if you can look at it, Nick, and send over your thoughts and.
I'm also gonna send this
look at it with
to,
Morgan's.
to Jay as well. I know he's not here tonight, but, I would like him to take a look at it as well.
Do you want me to
And,
scan this to Jay?
yes, if you could, that would be very helpful. Also, Morgan's, memorandum of concerns as well. So,
And the issue of the separate permit is something that I had a long conversation with Nick about,
You're right.
of not needing a separate permit. So I had actually a different version here. He did a re-edit following my comments that you don't have. And he did propose changes that, well, it was, I don't know, I was trying to follow it.
They had an older,
They had an older version?
the gentleman in the middle had an older version.
Okay.
I think the guy
I was
from
having
Swanson
trouble
had it.
following.
Yeah, it was.
Me too.
But,
So they didn't have the most up-to-date version, some of the ones.
Some of their concerns have already been
Been
taken
taken
out.
out.
yeah, but when-
We have the updated
Yeah.
version back.
and he modified it to the planning board approval of a site or a subdivision would act as the permit. You didn't need a separate permit with a separate planning board meeting publicly announced and on
You don't
and
need
on
that
and
for
on.
reporting? Okay.
So I think, yeah, I think that's,
So, yeah, we'll take a look.
we'll take a look.
I mean, and to Rick's point, I get Rick's concern on cost.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly weighing on Kevin and I every single day.
Mhm.
But I will tell you that going into this budget year, there are going to be significant costs for MS4.
Yeah.
Because the town has not done,
It's, yeah.
they haven't.
Oh, my end, just the maintenance end is gonna go through the roof.
Yeah,
Engineering's going through the roof.
yeah.
You know, not even what you guys are doing.
I know, I mean, we were talking about, Kevin, do you have anything that you wanna add to
No,
the
I mean,
conversation? I mean,
No, I'm good. I follow along with this, but this is your purview, this is your, you know, I'm just here to help
well, I
out
mean,
if
this,
I
I mean, it
can.
is, you know, it's open.
Lou does a great job of prepping sites for us, and I just maintain after the fact. You know, be back to the detention ponds, you know, we don't want them. Leave them with the owners,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, the stuff about the surety bond and all that stuff, is that
Well,
necessary?
the projects, the road gets bonded ahead of time.
Yeah.
Before construction, unless for the sites, they've been doing restoration bonds instead of a road bond, because it's not gonna be a town road. And then,
Was it changed the law? Didn't that change the law on anyone on the planning conference last weekend? I'll go find it.
Yeah.
yeah, so there was
Because
maybe there might have been-
the two projects
Said,
that,
be careful.
the two
Okay.
projects that had the restoration bonds were the Corning Farm and Rose Meadows right now, are under that restoration bond. And all that provides for is enough funds to bring equipment in to just stabilize the site. You're not restoring anything, you're just making sure that an abandoned site is not gonna be a problem in the future. So it might mean using dirt that they have stockpiled, which on Corning Farm, as well as Rose Meadows, the dirt's already there, so I didn't estimate money for dirt, but I certainly estimated money for trucks to pick it up from there, and the front end loader, and the dump trucks or whatever, to move it around and spread it, and then loam and seed. But subdivisions are different because they have the road bond. And that's for full construction, and the only time it gets reduced really is when they put it on the maintenance bond. Now, this seems to imply there should be another surety involved for the operating and maintenance of these structures, so. Talk to a homeowner association to fund that thing, good luck.
Weatherstone they did, I mean, you know. Or to fund them, I don't know to fund them, but they own it.
He is right, because.
Somebody owns it, I don't know who.
The homeowner
big
association,
pond.
the HOA owns it down there.
They have the
So
HOA.
Yeah.
I was in National, I came till 2022.
I've only been here since 2022.
But if someone called and had a problem, we'd be right. We had the authority to go out and,
Yeah.
there were some down in the south end that we actually did, push back and make the repairs and charge it to the homeowner. Because when they had put in some type of recreation, crazy thing for their children. They're very high-end homes down like on Lamb Road and, but, yeah, that's what Morgan's talking about, yeah.
Bought my kids a rope swing yesterday.
Yeah, that would do it, this is like,
Used tire and some old string.
No, I spun for the $30 plastic one.
Yeah.
they had put like a disc golf thing in and all this. We have big water problems down in South End.
Yeah.
So do you want this on the 21st agenda? What do you want to do?
Is there time to post? Or
Probably not, because.
No.
wasn't it already
Well, we
published?
could put it on the agenda. It wouldn't be a public hearing. Not time to do a public
Yeah,
hearing.
but we've gotta have time to send it over to Morgan.
Yeah, so what do you want to do then?
So I think
I
probably,
think the next week, I think you're gonna be hard pressed to get something done. 21st is Tuesday.
Yeah.
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 I would say
Yeah,
Right,
for an
right, right.
extension.
we go.
Well, there's the week of the
You guys
27th.
told me
and then there's
forget it,
June
but
4th.
What is your thoughts?
I think we should ask for an extension
You do?
from EPA.
do you think
Yes,
they'll
told you
grant
no
it?
way? Who told you no way? Yes, Deb.
Deb said, don't do that.
Why, really?
Get it done.
Bring attention to
Yeah.
yourself,
No.
asking
know
for
why.
extension.
Be a good conversation to have on that, though.
Well, the
Yes.
small towns don't have the resources.
Right.
Like
And we are acting in good faith here, you know, this has all been recorded, so.
If there was,
Well, I think her thought of you're acting in good faith is you're acting in good faith several years later than you should be.
yeah, but I don't know.
That may be true, but.
I don't know. I'm under, I have found EPA to be relatively understanding as long as you're not going at it like, 3 months later going, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't do that. Yeah, I know you haven't heard anything about it, we haven't done anything on it, but we've been on 90 days. I think if you can say, hey, EPA, we are on our 6th draft of the regulations and have met 6 times over the last, 6 weeks or whatever it is, and we'd like another 3 months, because we just brought in,
Yeah,
some
but
other
that's
stakeholders, to me, I think that's reasonable.
dragging it over the summer.
I don't know, that's my thought.
So did we mention what is the week of the 27th? Like the 29th, I mean, I don't know what.
Well,
the room
then you have
availability
June
on that.
4th. I don't think I have too much on June 4th. I don't think so.
I mean,
And
if
you
we
have the
can-
week of the 27th.
And if we have time to kick things back and forth,
Yeah.
I mean, if we can do a lot of it offline, we can
Yeah.
have 1 or 2 back and forth sessions of circulating a document.
Right,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's worth kind of taking that extra
Yeah.
little bit of time rather than trying to hammer it every week and.
Put a
you-
revision number on the top so we know what we're looking at here.
I mean, if we
So-
meet, if we meet the,
Or date.
Or a date.
yeah, I
And
mean,
a
if we meet
footer.
if we meet the
Yeah.
4th, I mean, you guys tell me you're the board, but
well, I mean, I'm just thinking,
if we do the 4th, that gives us we could do another one 3 weeks after that, and it would still be the end of June if we.
so we would have to we'd have to do a revised version, give it to Morgan to review. You're gonna have to review, Lou, whoever. Then, we're gonna have another public hearing to review those changes.
No, you'd have a public hearing to
Not until
Accept
you
it.
have it,
until,
yeah.
right, until you have it done.
Is that a
Right.
go, no-go decision night?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, you
Okay.
wanna get everyone's concerns ironed out before you go to a public hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think if we toss it back and forth, Nick, do you think you could get something, maybe, cause I know we have Memorial Day coming up, but if we did it if we looked at something by the end of next week, that we could kinda toss back to Morgan, give him a week, now we're at June 4th.
I think my review will take the least amount of time, to
Okay.
be honest. I would like the board and you to kind of, not you, whoever, to kind of go through and say, I don't think we need this, I don't think we need this, I don't think we need this, I know we need this, but I think we can simplify it. Nick, can we simplify it?
Okay,
Because like I said, I have like a half dozen things, and some of them, like I said, I need to be like, that 50%, 80% removal, that is what it is, that has to be in there.
so
The
if,
site inspection thing, we need procedures and site inspections, new site inspections, who's gonna do it? You have that in there, in paragraphs this big, that's fine.
so if Jay has anything, or any members have anything, get it to Joan, Joan will get it to me, and I'll share it with Nick.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Does the
I'll let
board
you know.
want to have another special meeting before that? It's up to you guys.
Just remember, whatever you come up with, you're gonna be living with it for a
Yeah,
while.
yeah.
Well, yes, of course.
So if you can get an extension to kind of hammer some of the details out, probably gonna be better off long-term.
Well, if we can, you can, I
Pick
guess.
Deb's
ask.
mind and see what she says.
Yeah.
That's mine, you want?
But
But I,
let's give it a few weeks and see where we're at.
all right.
I think I think as long as we can get them something before the deadline and say, we really and truly have been making a good faith
Right.
effort to do this.
Right.
We've met
We can get
on
something
these
to them
things,
to
on all
meet
of these
that, yeah,
different
I
things. And, I've done it before, you send them the regulations, this is where they're at right now, and we need another month or 2 months or whatever it
Right,
is.
we have to go to a public hearing.
I mean,
And-
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we
Right.
get to the point where we've got a good document and we think we're pretty good with it, and we need to go to a public hearing, then have to.
I mean, EPA wants to have the regulations in place.
Right.
If you tell them you're gonna have them in place September, June, and you ask, do you have till September, and you have them in place in September, is it really a big deal? They don't wanna keep giving extensions, but.
But we did already email them and tell them that the ordinances were changed at town meeting, and so we've
Yes.
already given them an update.
They know we've made
Yes.
progress.
So, yeah, they know where we are.
did the regs, but.
Yeah,
So June 4th then?
June 4th?
June 4th, yeah, I would
June 4th.
definitely do June 4th, yeah.
I would say if we can get another draft
Yeah.
done and to Morgan and me.
And it sounds like he
June
didn't
4th, that would be
have
great.
the newer version of this, which is,
I'll send it over to
I sent him the second one.
He wasn't that far off, there was.
No.
The numbers are kind of screwy.
I could find out where he was, he wasn't that far off.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think he
we
had.
should wait until you have another.
Yeah, I don't know. He may have had, he didn't have the stuff that Lou and I had gone over with, and I don't know if he had, I don't know if they both had the highlight version or not.
Date the next revision, please.
Yes.
Well, Jim was highlighted.
His was highlighted, but I don't know, it didn't
I
sound
don't
like,
know,
I don't know if he highlighted himself.
Because I sent him the version I have,
oh, you did,
yeah,
Morgan?
Well,
to Rick.
the numbers he was referring to were not
Yeah.
the numbers that
Yeah.
the last
Yeah.
one Nick did.
He probably did the analysis on an older version.
Yeah,
I
Hmm,
sent him the new version,
probably.
I'm saying.
yeah.
Yeah, he did update it to the one he sent.
Okay.
okay. All right, any other business? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, second?
Okay.
Yeah, right on.
Second, all right, all those in favor? Aye,
Make a motion.
opposed, abstained, motion passes.
I'll third it.
Big bonus for you.
Zero. All right, good evening, everybody, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on May 21st. Good night.
Fine, you guys can make your own.